Moving on to lesson 6.2, we'll talk about different characteristics of parallelograms. At this point, it's probably a good idea in your video to pause it and go ahead and write out the theorems for this lesson. There are 6 of them, and have them on your paper, and you can add pictures as you go. I want to regress a little bit and go back to chapter 3. We had some theorems that we learned from transversals, and if you remember, a transversal would just be 2 sets of lines and two sets of lines that are transversed by at least one line. In this case, we would have a pair of parallel lines, two pairs of parallel lines transversed by 2 transversals, and it would look like this. One of the characteristics we learned was that we had the consecutive interior angle theorem, where these 2 angles here add up to 180 degrees. So make a picture of that on your paper and mark that down, because we're going to be using that. We also learned that in these angles we have alternate interior angles, and they are congruent. We will also use that information. Now, our first theorem for this lesson, 6.2.1, is that consecutive angles of a parallelogram are supplementary. I just showed you that for theorem 3.1.1, and let's take a look at it. If we know that angle A is 100 degrees, then its consecutive angle, either D or B, that's the angle next to it, must add up to 180. So 100 plus 80 is 180. Now if D is 80, its consecutive angle 100, consecutive angle C or A must be 100 also. So you can see that we have 100 plus 80 is 180, 80 plus 100 is 180, 100 plus 80 is 180, and so forth. These all add to 360 degrees. Our second theorem is that also these opposite sides are congruent. So if you just know the, in a parallelogram, if you just know the measure of one angle, you can solve for all 4. If A is 100 degrees, its opposite angle will be 100, and then you can use the consecutive angle theorem to find the other 2 angles. Theorem 6.2.3 takes these properties that we just used and forms them into a rectangle. So a rectangle is also a parallelogram, but if it has one right angle, then it means all the other angles must be right angles. So if angle A is 90, that means its consecutive angle, angle D, would have to be 90 also. Also, if A is 90, its opposite angle C would have to be 90. 6.4.4, opposite sides of a parallelogram are congruent. So that means that AD is congruent to BC and AB is congruent to DC. So its opposite angles and opposite sides are congruent. Now the diagonals of a parallelogram bisect each other. So once we've drawn 2 diagonals, that's from vertice to opposite vertice, what we've done is actually divide them in half. This is one of the characteristics of the parallelogram. So that means now that AE would be congruent to CE, and BE would be congruent to DE. So let's look at example 1. It says find each measure in the parallelogram, and it says that BD equals 11.6. So this diagonal equals 11.6, and the measure of angle ABC equals 72 degrees. They ask us to find DC. So side DC. We know that DC is opposite side AB, and if AB equals 6.3, then DC will also equal 6.3. Another thing that they ask us is to find EC. This is this one piece of the diagonal here, and we've learned that these diagonals are cut in half for parallelograms. So EC is actually equal to EA. EA is 4.2, so EC would also be 4.2. And the last part of that example, they ask us to find ED. Now, ED equals 1/2 of BD. And though it doesn't show it on the drawing unless you wrote it in for yourself, BD equals 11.6. So ED equals 1/2 BD, which is 1/2 of 11.6, which is 5.8. Oh, and we have one other thing to solve, an angle measure. So the measure of DAB, DAB. The measure of DAB is equal to 180 minus the measure of angle ABC. Now ABC is this angle right here, and part of it shows 41 degrees, but we learned up here in the instructions that the whole angle is 72. And we can do several things with this, but if we know that this angle is 72, we know that its consecutive angle, angle A, has to be 180 minus 72. So 180 minus 72 is 108 degrees. So angle DAB equals 108 degrees. We have another angle measure to find, and that's ADC. Now, we know that ADC is opposite angle ABC, and ABC is 72. So ADC will be 72 degrees. Let's find DAC. DAC equals DAC equals the measure of angle DAB, the whole angle, minus CAB. So we're using consecutive angles, and the measure of CAB equals the measure of ACD, alternate interior angles. So if DAC is the measure of DAB minus CAB, and we know that CAB is 63, then DAC equals, that should say, then DAC equals 108 minus 63, which is 45. So if that was confusing to you, write the angle measures on the drawing as I'm talking, and you'll be able to see it. Or rewrite the problem. Example 2, carrying it a little further, it says to find the measure of each angle and side in this quadrilateral, which is also a parallelogram. We have variables in this one, so it makes it a little more difficult, but you still use the same idea. So let's take 7a and 13a, because they're consecutive angles, and set them to 180. And if we solve, we find that a equals 9. So 7a would be 63, and 13a would be 117. And now you can find your opposite angles. So if 7a is 63, that means that L, the opposite angle, is 63. And if M is 117, the opposite angle is 117. Another solution we need to find using the same drawing, and it says that B, we're to solve the sides. Okay, so we have sorry, I'm looking for my, okay, so we have the side JK, which is X, which is equal to the side ML, which is 2y plus 1. So X equals 2y plus 1, and you can solve first for y, and y equals 4, and then what you want to do is solve for x. We haven't done this in a while. This is a system of equations, and this is from Algebra 1. So if you have a problem in your homework, which I don't think you do, that's like this, you can contact me, but I'm going to demo this in class. I realized it's just a little long for doing on the video. Anyhow, we solve for y first. We substitute the answer from y into the system for x, and we end up with the answer 9. X equals 9, y equals 4, and if x equals 9, that means that JK is 9. That means that ML will also be 9, and that JM, which is 2 times x, will be 2 times 9, which is 18. And then LK can also be solved because it's the opposite of JM, and they will be equal. It will also be 18. So go ahead and do your homework. We'll go over any problems you need in class. Go ahead and email me if you have something you want me to demo in class, and then we'll move on in 6.2.